Hello learners, welcome back to the course on learning and development in organization. We move to the last session of this module. We'll be having a small discussion on stakeholders. Many a time we use this word, but do we actually understand the relevance of stakeholders in organizational context? This session would try to unravel what do you mean by a stakeholder. I'm Dr. Cyril Issac. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Business, Indian Institute of Technology, Guwahati. Now, when you look into the stakeholders and today's discussion, it will revolve around the theme, decisions lose their power when they lose the engagement of the stakeholder. So, stakeholder, the relevance of the stakeholder is being categorically summarized by this particular statement. Let's look into the stakeholder in more detailed way. When you're looking into stakeholder, let's understand who are stakeholders. They are nothing but individuals or groups impacted by the HR decisions, and this is very specific to human resource management I'm talking. So when you are looking into human resource policies, workplace culture and compliance, they will have a certain impact on these entities. So these people or these entities rather would be stakeholders. So key stakeholder types would be internal, they would be external, direct, indirect. Let's understand this in a more detailed way. When we look into the stakeholder theory says that organizations should consider interest of all affected parties. So when you're talking about affected parties, it means that all who are involved in the decision and all who are impacted by any decision. So let's understand this through a classification, primary versus secondary stakeholder. Primary stakeholders have a direct and essential connection to the organization. Let's say the employees, managers, customers, investors, they all fall into this category. Whereas secondary stakeholders are advocacy groups, they are media, they are non-governmental organizations who do not have an immediate financial stake in the company but can influence the HR decisions. Then there's a classification, internal and external stakeholders. Internal stakeholders operate within the organization. They include the employees, HR personnel, executives, managers who influence or are influenced by HR policies. Whereas external stakeholders be government agencies, it will be legal bodies, labor unions and industry competitors. They influence HR policies through regulatory requirements. Then there is direct and indirect stakeholders. So you look into direct stakeholders, they are actively involved in HR related matters. Employees, for example, directly benefit from HR policies on wages, benefits and training programs. Or there might be some indirect stakeholders such as customers and shareholders who may not directly be involved in HR decisions but are affected by them. Now let's understand the classification model, the classic classification model of stakeholders. So this model helps categorize stakeholder based on attributes like, let's say, power. And talk about power, you are essentially looking into something that refers to the ability of a stakeholder to influence the HR policies and business decisions. So in simpler words, stakeholders with high power such as executives or government regulators and labor unions can enforce changes in HR strategies through legal requirements, through collective bargaining or strategic business decisions. The relevance of collective bargaining and the relevance of unionism we have discussed in our NPTEL course, Labor Welfare and Industrial Relations, which will be running together with this particular course in the same semester. We also see that there is a possible interest group. Interest in the sense that interest represents for the level of concern a stakeholder is having regarding the HR policies and decisions. Then there is influence, influence being the ability of the stakeholders to shape HR outcomes through direct or indirect engagement. And finally, you have the urgency. Urgency is all about how immediately a stakeholder's concerns need to be addressed. So legal compliance issues, employee grievances, labor disputes all require urgent attention. They go for that. Then let's look into the key stakeholders. Whenever you're looking into the stakeholders, there are many. The critical ones are customers. Customer is somebody who we have to satisfy, we have to oblige to. So when you are looking into stakeholders, my discussion will always start with customer. So you have target customers, customer intimacy, all becoming relevant there. Then you have the investors, or what we call as the owners. So your market value, your financial performance, tangibles, intangibles, risk, etc. is associated with them. You have the communities, the regulators, the social responsibility, all the oversight, cultural awareness are directly associated with them. You have the collaborative value given by partners, dealers, so all the partnership, outsourcing, it all comes under them. Then you have employees who have competence, commitment, contribution, and then you have line managers, who shape strategy, who create organization, traction, etc. Now let's look into some of the internal HR stakeholders. The first one obviously are employees. They expect fair pay, they expect job security, and needless to say, they expect career growth. When you talk about HR managers, they try to balance business goals and employee needs. Then you have the senior leadership who try to align the HR strategies with the company goals specifically. You look into regulatory and external influence on HR, you have the unions and labor organizations. As I mentioned, we have clearly demarcated and explained them in our labor welfare and industrial relations course, right in the NPTEL platform, running with this particular course. Then we have the government and legal bodies, regulating hiring, compensation and employee rights, all being part of it. So these are some of the typical regulatory and external influences on HR. Now let's look into an interesting topic, Murray, Webster and Simon's 3D grid. Now this talks about the key dimensions being power, legitimacy and urgency, something which I have already introduced you to. So in case of application in HRM, HR professionals use the 3D grid to assess which stakeholders require immediate attention and which can be managed through long-term engagement. Let's take an example. An employee grievance about workplace harassment, high urgency and legitimacy. So you are being delineating the things based on power, interest and attitude. Be it acquaintance, sleeping giant, tripwire, time bomb, all these are, plus and minus with respect to attitude, with respect to power. Then you have savior, friend with respect to power, interest, attitude again. The combinations also give you the interest specific results. So let's take the example as I was discussing, an employee grievance about workplace harassment, high urgency and legitimacy must be addressed immediately. Whereas an industry trend suggesting future workforce upskilling, it is clearly low urgency but high legitimacy, may be planned as a long-term initiative. Then we look into business and social stakeholders. You have customers and clients, HR ensures trained employees for better service. You have investors and shareholders typically, where human resource management impacts the profitability and workforce efficiency. Then you have the society and community, typically which looks into the HR policies or contributes to HR policies. Something like CSR, ethics and diversity are the brainchild or the influential factors of society and community. Now let's understand stakeholder expectations versus HR responsibilities. Now very quickly, if you look into the key stakeholder expectations and HR roles, you have employees looking into job security, career growth and fair compensation, whereas managers and executives, they have more alignment towards work and workforce efficiency and business alignment. Investors and shareholders, they look into profitability and sustainable workforce management. Regulators and legal bodies, they look into compliance with employment laws and ethical practices. You have communities and stakeholders who look into CSR. So now let's take up an example of Tesla as a case study where Tesla's HRM and stakeholder management would be observed. Tesla, as you know, is a leading innovator in the electric vehicle and renewable energy industry. So when you are looking into this case study, please understand the context. It faces unique HR challenges due to its fast-paced work culture, high performance expectations and labor practices. So the company's HRM strategy must balance the interest of multiple stakeholders, including employees, if you ask me, investors, government regulators, and the broader community. So when you are looking into the key stakeholders in Tesla's HRM strategy, you have employees typically. So they want what? Competitive pay and retention efforts. So Tesla employs a highly skilled workforce. It will include engineers, factory workers, corporate professionals. So all of their requirement converges down to competitive pay retention efforts. Then you look into the community specifically. You see that sustainability and environmental initiatives are what they are looking for. So the Tesla's operations have a significant impact on local communities, particularly in areas where its factories are located. So these communities are clearly looking into sustainability initiatives. Then you have investors. Investors are more concerned about profitability, innovation, and market growth. Tesla's investors focus on financial performance. They focus on technological innovation, if you ask me, and even long-term market expansion is there in their kitty. HR policies must support these goals by attracting top talent. They should look into fostering a culture of continuous improvement and ensuring efficient workforce management. Then there is government and regulatory bodies, compliance with labor laws and safety standards. So Tesla operates in multiple countries requiring strict adherence to labor laws, workplace safety regulations, etc. And then you also see a balancing innovation and workforce needs that is critical for HR at Tesla. So these are some of the critical aspects with respect to this case study in case of Tesla. Another significant case study would be that of Google's HR approach to stakeholders. We have discussed a case study with respect to Google in our first two sessions with respect to this module. But in the stakeholder specific discussion, I would like to bring in the key stakeholders, again the same set, employees who are more concerned with career growth and well-being. So Google's employees expect a workplace that supports career advancement, skill development, etc. and also their well-being is vital. Then you have customers who are more into the quality, the product quality linked to HR practices. Then you have the investors who are more of strong HR supporters with respect to the business growth. Then you have the society. You look into the DIB, diversity, inclusion, and the CSR programs. Google is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and even belongingness initiatives that support underrepresented groups in the workplace. Then you have balancing stakeholder interests. Google's HRM approach successfully balances stakeholders' expectations by implementing policies that typically benefit employees, customers, investors, and society. Now, before concluding, let's also quickly look into the challenges in stakeholder management. You have a conflict between different stakeholder interests. There is no doubt about it. One of the biggest challenges in HRM is balancing the varying interests of different stakeholders. Employees seek high wages, job security, and career growth, while investors prioritize, cost efficiency or profitability. So one hand you have investors, on the other hand you have the employees. Then you have government regulators who focus on legal compliance or fair labor practices, whereas your customers expect quality products and services at the competitive prices. So these are the conflicting interests. You have ethical dilemmas in HR decision making, if you ask me. HR managers often face these ethical challenges when making workforce related decisions. Issues such as, let's say, fair hiring practices or employee privacy for that matter, or sometimes workplace discrimination for that matter, or wage disparities require ethical consideration. You have legal compliance issues affecting HR policies. You look into government regulations constantly evolving, and non-compliance can lead to legal penalties, lawsuits, and even to a certain extent the reputational damage that it can cause. It might be tremendous. So HR professionals must stay updated with employment laws, with labor rights and workplace safety standards, and diversity policies to ensure full compliance. We also look into stakeholder mapping very quickly. This is all about an exercise to help you determine who your stakeholders are and how much engagement, communication or consideration they need. So by mapping and prioritizing your stakeholders, you can focus your attention in the most critical way. So you have on the x-axis stakeholder influence, on the y-axis you have stakeholder interest. So based on high interest, low influence, low interest, low influence, low interest, high influence, you see the critical quadrants. The person or the entity with low interest, low influence will have essential information, minimal contact, whereas high interest, high influence will always regularly engage and keep satisfied. So please note who your stakeholders are, how effectively they can be mapped into these four quadrants. You have the interest in one side, you have the influence in another side. Many a time we see stakeholders who want to give or put high influence, but their interest might be quite low. So this is what in general way we say that they are more into taking up the authority, but they are not ready to take up the accountability. So this is where there will be always a bone of contention, there will be always a conflict. When you talk about learning and development, this module typically paves way for the better understanding of how we can as an organization proceed further. So that is why I always wanted to introduce stakeholders also into you. Stakeholders typically are not specifically your employees only. They are not specifically your employees, investors, a whole plethora of people, a whole set of entities whom your organization will influence or may get influenced from. That's what stakeholders are. Now, coming up modules will look more detail into learning and development. Till then, take care. Bye-bye.